Hello everyone, and now it is time for me to do the game player tier ranking for Big Brother 25. And I'm just going to say now that this might be the weakest cast gameplay wise, and it's crazy that I'm saying this right after I said something very similar about the Big Brother 24 cast, but wow, I really struggled with this one. I switched a bunch of people around several times, and I might still switch people around during this recording process, even though I switched some people right before I started recording what I'm saying now. Definitely due to all the really weird twists and the format issues that happened throughout the season, as well as them trying to drag it to 100 days, really just made this a struggle. But obviously, I'm going to use the 7 tiers that I've used throughout all of my Big Brother Canada and US gameplay tier rankings, which are Abysmal, Bad, Potential, Mediocre, Solid, Good, and Great. Let's just get right to it. So at 17th is Luke. There really isn't a lot to say about Luke in general throughout the season. One is because he was barely on the edit during the week he was there, but he actively did not do much during the 1 week he was there, from what we could see on the feeds. There was the 5% alliance in the very first day that was formed, and pretty much died instantly. Neither side of the house really wanted to deal with him, which says a lot, since he could have been a solid a number, or rode both sides where they needed his votes for safety. There was also a lot of discussion from the house guests on both sides in the house about targeting him during the 1 week he was there, and there's a good chance that he is targeted had the format of the week meant that everyone but the 4 people who are automatically immune this week given the opportunity to be nominated. He was a big target during the limited time he was in the house, and he had no idea what was really happening. Outside of him being expelled by the end of the first week, I don't think he had the potential to even pick up on any element of the season. At 16th is Kirsten. She's a very weird case, since the week of her eviction was such a weird case, essentially. It is this way because 4 people were immediately nominated due to losing competitions on day 1, and it immediately created a hierarchy. Due to this, Kirsten was immediately put at the bottom due to being automatically nominated on the first day, where if it was a normal day 1 or 2, where no one is nominated, Kirsten might have done better in the season, or another season. She started creating a bunch of alliances and doing a whole lot of game talk because she was immediately nominated, and it got around to people since everyone else was a lot more relaxed in comparison. While she did come down with the frantic game talk after the first 2 to 3 days, it was too late and the damage was done. Despite all that, one thing that did dig Kirsten's grave even more is that she shit talked the HOH Riley a lot, to the point where it made Riley feel away, and a lot of the house guests used this to build a target on her. Most of the house kind of just ignored her after that, and she really had no idea what was happening in the house, which we saw even in her exit interview with Julie, so I don't have faith in her strategic reads. She did struggle strategically, and she was close to winning the veto, if I remember correctly, but she got last in the other competition she did. Socially, Kirsten was not much to talk about, but maybe she would have done better without that weird day 1 setup. In general, I don't think Big Brother is for her. At 15th is Hisam. I have no idea whether I'm going to keep him in this spot or not, or move him down a number. That's what I wrote when I was writing this, but right before recording this, I did bump him down a tier and a few spots. It became very clear to me from the beginning that Hassan was struggling socially since he spent a lot of his time on the feet just working out in the gym by himself, while everyone else was getting along and making bonds. He did become a part of the Professor's Alliance at around the end of the first week, but it mainly came off like it happened due to them needing numbers, and Hassan was kind of just on his own. Anyways, it was good that he was in the alliance, but he was always the top target of the other side, and then he won HOH. This HOH reign did not do any good for him, as he was too focused on Riley to realize that his allies were turning on him, and he gave the bait to America about the quote-unquote forced sides, which just continued to dig his own grave and made his allies feel like he didn't even want to work with them. What is interesting about him is that despite him thinking that he was safe in his last week, since he should have been safe, since his allies made a dumb move, he did get to work when he was nominated and was very close to staying, so it was impressive that he won over his allies, though they shouldn't have turned on him to begin with. When it comes to strategy, I actually don't think he was bad whatsoever. Or he wasn't really bad. He knew that Matt and Jack needed to go. He knew that Corey was someone who was not to be trusted, but he should have faked that relationship since he would have been in a better position. And him not having a good relationship with Corey was why he ended up going home. And out of everyone, he had the best read to lead the professors to the right path. And when it comes to competitions, he excelled during his short time, as he got first or second in every competition. The issue is that he should have thrown some of those competitions, since he built a target on himself for no reason, and he really didn't need to win those competitions. Despite being more mixed on him than negative, I don't see many cases where he ever really becomes a juror, since I think his flaw is mainly his personality, not gameplay. I don't think he can adjust his personality enough to the point where he could be a better player, which is why I ended up putting him in the abysmal tier by the end of it all. Though he might be on the higher end of that tier once I rank everyone from BBUS. And the final person in this tier at 14th is Cameron. I initially had him a few spots higher when I was writing this, and I was shocked that I didn't have him lower. But obviously, now that I'm recording this, I did put him lower. And I feel like I'm going to say this about a lot of players in the season, pertaining, debating about whether I should put them higher or lower, and whether I do such. Cameron started the season in an okay enough position, since he was a part of Riley's alliance, and I believe he was in the 5, not the 8, which is a solid enough position. The thing is, the alliance made it very clear who was and was not in the alliance, and Cameron almost immediately threw his alliance under the bus, bumping him out of the alliance essentially, and the other side did not see him as a trustworthy person, so he was kind of just on his own. He was nominated for the next 2 weeks and almost went home on both times, where he only stayed due to stuff outside of his control of knowledge or action. So he was on the outs and he didn't contribute anything to his staying during those 2 weeks. Right when it seemed like he was going to go home, he won his first HOH, but just used it to boot 2 people who were at the bottom with Jag and Blue, which are 2 people that he should not have been targeting. He never used any of his HOHs to actually improve his position in the game, as he always thought he knew most or the most out of everyone, though he was generally off a lot of the time, and never really listened to anyone else. He was the main target the following week, and never really listened to anyone else, as he would have gone home that next week had he not won the veto. Cameron then wins another HOH and continued burying his head socially without telling anyone his nominations, and almost had his HOH screwed over by making poor nominations, as Felicia, the person he was not targeting, was on her way out until a flip happened that had nothing to do with him. Cameron was easily sent home the very next week and was able to return to the house, which I dock him and everyone else who was evicted and returns to the house. And he was weaponized by Matt and Jake into an alliance where they used him on his final HOH before sending him home to the jury house. Cameron's huge issue in the game is that he was abysmal and treacherous socially. He was only close to Red and somewhat Boy, Jane, and America throughout the season, though the latter two, or his relationship with the latter two, was a lot more inconsistent, and damn near everyone else hated him. Cameron did not know how to speak to people, was seen as creepy by most of the house guests, and was extremely condescending. Even strategically, he was not good, as he threw his alliance under the bus for no reason, never really gained a new one, outside of being weaponized for a week or two by Cameron and Jag. He was always behind on information in the house because he thought he knew more than he did, and he barely spoke to many other people. When it comes to competitions, Cameron is great, as it is the one redeemable quality he had, as they gave him several weeks of protection. At the same time, he would have went home had he not won those HOHs and vetoes, and even with that, he was still booted pre-jury before he got the buyback opportunity, and he didn't even last long after that. Cameron is essentially very similar to Frank in BP14, and I put him in that abysmal tier, so it's fitting for Cameron to be right there with him, solely based on Frank's Big Brother 14 performance, and Cameron's Big Brother 25 performance being very similar to that. So the first person in this tier at 13th is Riley. When it comes to Riley, there's an argument where I can place her in the potential tier, and there's another argument where I can easily place her in the abysmal tier. Riley was able to win the first HOH, which in general is a very easy HOH to have, since you can do the easiest and non-biased move where things were even easier for Riley since she didn't have to nominate anyone, since 4 people were automatically nominated due to the competitions and she just had to save 2 of them. But somehow, despite her not having to make a tough choice, Riley ended up outing her entire alliance to the entire house, not only because she and her alliance only hung out with one another mainly, but because she told people not in her alliance who was in her alliance. She really did not have a good grasp on strategy, and people kind of blamed her for the division that was set in the house. Despite her poor strategic play, a lot of the people in the house really did like her. Half of the house were really ride or die allies for her, even to the point where they all would have vetoed her off the block, knowing that one of them would have been the replacement nominee, and campaigned to save her until the very end. Even a lot of people on the other side of the house did like her, as people like Izzy, Suri, and Felicia really did want to keep her around. If she let her social game do the work for her, I think she would have done a lot better, and she was a decent enough competitor. In general, her strategy was just really bad, and I don't know if she has the ability to improve on that front, but there are cases where she probably does better on other seasons. But I really just cannot ignore the fact that she was HOH one week and was evicted the next round. So at 12th is Red. I really have no idea what to think about Red in general, and of course a part of that is because he's extremely forgettable. Red bonded with Cameron extremely quickly and ended up being pulled into the Professor's alliance, though that was mainly because they needed him as a number. Despite being a part of this alliance, he was generally put in the bottom of it, since Cameron was not in that alliance and the house guests just did not trust Red at all. Though he wasn't this devious player that his supposed allies made him or viewed him as. He was the last person to be told about the Hissam plan, showing where he was in the alliance, and ignored all the warnings that he wasn't as in as he thought he was. If I remember correctly, Red was also one of those players who didn't really speak game to people, so people felt off about him regarding that, and couldn't really pin him well. Red kept on ignoring warnings that his alliance was not with him, and even when there was a new alliance that included Cameron to be with the Suri, Felicia, Izzy group, he ignored that they did not care for him, as he actively encouraged Cameron to not go after Izzy, which would have helped both of their games. And he also didn't make much relationships with other people. An example is cultivating something with Boy Jane, since they were lumped together despite them not really having a relationship. He was blindsided out of the house, and really let himself get tricked and outplayed by Jared in his final week, even though he was the pawn that ended up going home. I don't see Red really improving strategically or socially, and he won one comp, but I don't think he was noticeable in competitions. He has a lower ceiling than some of the people who were evicted before him, even though he doesn't have the same lows as them as a player. But at the same time, I do kind of feel like his eviction was mainly just by happenstance and due to he was associated with, or who he was associated with. So in that case, I could see him having a higher argument compared to the others, since he did less wrong, I guess. So at 11th is Izzy. I might move Izzy up a spot or two, but that's not something I'm very sure about. She came into the game immediately clocking the Fields relationship and got in with them from the very beginning of the season, as her knowing their secret caused them all to be very protective of her. Including that, she also clocked close with Felicia, McCall, and Boy Jane, though she took the latter for granted and really started playing the game aggressively from early on, while also having good relationships with people like Corey, which she does not manage well later on, Red, and Hissam, though she took advantage of those relationships as well, as she should have used them more. The issue with Izzy is that she was so glued to Suri that she neglected so many relationships that she did have with people, while making no effort in getting close with the other side, to the point where many of them did intend on targeting her throughout the season. The worst being her contentious relationship with Cameron. She did help run things in the beginning, but most of the choices she made were horrible. She should have gotten rid of Cameron as soon as she could, booting Sam, someone who would have protected her, and someone she could have had a relationship with outside of the fields, due to her emotions was astronomically dumb for her specifically, as I think they had a final two, and there was no reason why she should have gotten rid of Red over Jag. Izzy didn't win a competition throughout the season, though she came close a few times, so I guess she isn't the worst competitor, but it isn't a skill that she could rely on, clearly. And another reason why Izzy is so low is that she wasn't even playing to win the game, as she is perfectly fine with going to the end with a mother and a son who would obviously choose one another over her. And even worse, she sniped away any individuality she could have had throughout the season and actively encouraged the erratic behavior of her allies when they needed stability. She also did dumb stuff like tell Corey that he needed to vote out America, and did a poor job of reassuring her allies. Socially, she really wasn't good, and most of the connections that she did have ended up faltering, mainly due to her. And while she was active strategically, she often made the wrong choices. And what makes her spot solidified on this list is that I see her being a pre-juror more often than not on any season or scenario. So at 10 is Jared. Lord have mercy. I thought that Jared was going to be lower on this list when I started making it, and there's still a good chance that he could be lower on the list by the time I actually publish the video. I actually didn't move him from when I wrote this to when I'm recording this, so he stayed the same. So Jared had the advantage of not only having his mother in the house, someone he can 100% implicitly and blindly trust, but it being annoying to everyone in the house but Izzy was a huge advantage. And the fact that his mother is a legendary reality star who thrives in games like this was also a huge advantage for him. He was initially good with the Riley side of the house, while his mother was good with the other side of the house. All he had to do was maintain his position, and it could have carried him very far in the season, as targeting the Riley side of the house so early really did nothing good for his game. But he ratted the Riley side of the house out way too early for no reason and gave up on his good position throughout the game just to join all of Suri's alliances, instead of really having his own thing going on. But then he would be resentful because his allies were making decisions without him, or they were telling him about plans. Jared also could not keep his mouth shut throughout the season, as he told Blue about his secret for no reason, and then actively deteriorated his relationship with Corey, which was someone he needed in the game, and I believe they did have a final two early on. Jared told a bunch of unnecessary lies throughout the season and could not keep up with them. He created a lie to Red about Cameron unnecessarily during his age, and he tried his best to do damage control, and that ultimately led to Red going home, when the best move for he and his alliance was for Jag to go home. He told Jag about knowing about the power that Matt had when Suri deliberately told him to not tell anyone, but he had the nerve to get mad at Jag when he was the one who spilled the beans to begin with. And of course there was the infamous fight with Corey, where he lied about a bunch of alliances, and his behavior caused the game to completely flip, with Izzy getting booted over Felicia, and that relationship didn't recover for the rest of his time in the house either, and he couldn't recover at all. It says a lot that he squandered every single opportunity and privilege he had. Jared was pretty good in competitions. He could make connections before ruining them, and was a mess strategically, which is why he is higher than some of the others, I guess. So at 9th is our winner, Jag. By the time I record and publish this, he could either be in the mediocre tier or the bad tier, which just shows how all over the place I feel about him. But it says a lot that the winner of the season is placed 9th on their season rankings, but it is well deserved. He ultimately didn't move up to the mediocre tier and is still in the bad tier, but the fact that a winner is in the bad tier is something that I never thought would happen, and due to this and just comparing how I ranked the winners from BB Can and BB was in the past, he is the worst winner. Jag got close to Riley from the beginning and wanted to create an onion alliance, but with the way he did it was very obvious, by forming a final 2, then forming a final 3, a final 5, and a final 8. So the people at the bottom knew they were at the bottom, as there were other alliances that were created in that alliance that didn't include them and that was made beforehand. And then they all kind of just kept to themselves for the first week or so, meaning that they isolated themselves and they lost power. He was a huge target afterwards, and went home soon after, with his new alliance not even going out of the way to save him, and he was so out of the loop. Jag was lucky that a power to cancel an eviction that was only available for the week that he was going home was introduced, and Matt used it to save him. Jag being booted pre-jury is a huge negative, but he continued playing poorly afterwards. He volunteered to go on the block the next week for the same alliance that sent him home, and he was going to go home again pre-jury until they flipped on Red, which had nothing to do with him. He believed in this fake alliance after everyone moved on and being told several times that it wasn't real by some of his closer allies, and the flip on Izzy happened, which he had very little to do with, but he did benefit from it. Jag did start consistently winning competitions around this point, and formed 2 separate final 3s with Matt and Cameron and Matt and Bory Jane, and things started going his way. Jake was more strategic out of himself, Matt, and boy Jane, though he was still faulty, like revealing that he was the secret HOH, not owning his game in the house, taking Matt to the end, knowing that it was a harder beat, and he still needed information from better social players in order for him to make some of those strategic relationships, so he was still kind of reliant on them as well. And there are so many factors that benefited him, like there mainly being physical competitions in the season, being allowed to compete for back-to-back HOHs, which never happens. The thing that is very notable to me about Jake is that he is very unadaptable. He kept holding onto this idea about a huge alliance that was going to steamroll over everything and everyone, but he never really adapted to what was actually happening around him, where it was others who changed the dynamics or he was just behind in general. He was getting outplayed for like the first 60% of the season, and the other 40% of the season, he needed Matt's social relationships to make anything happen, and he relied on winning competitions, or else he would have been booted again. Jack's social game really wasn't strong throughout the season, and while it wasn't terrible, it was a weak category for him, hence why he was targeted and not Matt, and he was very poor strategically throughout a majority of the season. I will say running Matt's HOH to boot Suri was his best move, and he just got rid of people who are close enough in competition, I guess. I don't think he has the transferable skills to consistently do well on other seasons, since he only did well on this season due to a bunch of random, convenient twists, and it doesn't seem like he's the type to really learn from his mistakes. And the final person in this tier at 8 is Blue. I couldn't believe that she is this high on the list, though it is mainly due to others being a lot lower, though I did end up bumping her down a tier in between the writing process and the recording process. So, Blue ended up being in this ready side of the house, which is fine and all, but the alliance ended up blowing up because they made it clear how close they were. I remember a lot of people did not like Blue during this portion of the season, and she was one of the higher targets from the other side, but luckily she started getting closer to Jared, who was vouching for her. I will say that Blue did try to make moves and tried to play an aggressive game, where she did make bonds with other people eventually, but she really did not have a good read on the game, and was mainly lucky that the other side turned on one another several times, and she stayed over Jag when they were nominated together due to nothing of her own doing. The other side started warming up to her and stopped targeting her after a while, but then there was the house flip against Jared, which was not good for her, since it means her main alliance is targeting her backup alliance, and her trying to defend Jared just made her position with her alliance weaken exponentially. Blue did try to stir some pots and did push her agendas during this mid portion of the season, and it really did not work. And she really started pushing for Corey and America to go, but her allies never listened to her. While it was impressive that she did get closer to Suri and Felicia during the latter weeks of her run, it didn't lead to much, and she ignored several warnings about Matt and Jag not being as loyal to her as she is to them, which is definitely something that she needed to consider. Blue won one competition throughout the season, and that only happened because the Vita competition was really 2 competitions, so that's not a skill that she can rely on often. She in general has poor reads on what is happening in the house and really isn't the most aware of what is happening and wasn't all that socially either. But Blue is self-interested as she tried to keep all of her allegiances and people for as long as possible, realizing that it is selfish. She did know the moves that needed to be made, but the execution of it and whether she will execute it herself is where she ultimately falters. Another thing is that she was way too focused on her social media branding to really play as best as she could, and I don't think she has transferable skills that would cause her to do better on most seasons, or really the ability to do better as a player. Absolutely no one fit in the potential tier, so we're just going to move right along. The first person in this tier at 7th is Mikol. She is another person that I can easily go back and forth about regarding whether she deserves to be in the mediocre tier or whether she deserves to be in the bad tier, since there are very strong arguments for both. She is very similar to Annalise and Zakia, pertaining their gameplay and trajectory in their seasons, so that's why I have her here now, but I do think Mikol is weaker. And on most seasons, or essentially every other season of BBUS, actually no, that's not true, not every other, but every other modern or more recent season of Big Brother US, someone who makes it 10th is a drawer, which wasn't the case here. She got into the Bye Bye Bitches alliance with Suri, Felicia, Izzy, and Boy Jane, and also got into the Professor's alliance with all of them and Red and Hassan, which put her in a decent position. The issue is that Nicole never really got involved in the strategic dynamics of the house and didn't get close to her allies in the house, to the point where they're considering if she was loyal to them or not, and she was put at the bottom of her alliance for a while. And even when people in the other alliance tried getting close to her on a personal and strategic level, she made it very clear that she could not be any less interested, so they eventually stopped trying with her. There's a difference between playing under the radar and being an unreadable non-factor to everyone around her. She is not going to do anything that will cause people to target her or bring attention upon herself. She doesn't overplay the game or talk too much, and she is a loyal ally. When she's a part of your alliance, she lets everything happen around her, and she's very loyal if she is a part of your alliance. And even when she had the potential to be in a really good position with everyone due to the Izzy vote, she went back to ignoring everyone from the other side, working with the alliance that she was at the bottom of, and being left out of the gameplay in general. She ended up getting booted because she was seen as the better competitor and continued to lay low compared to Felicia, and she was very unreadable. While she was unintentionally laying low, she laid too low to the point where no one knew where she stood. She was okay in competitions, and she wasn't poor socially, but she wasn't good at it either. And I think she was the same way strategically. The thing that has her higher is that she was more intentional with not doing anything in the game, but she's just not good at all, so here she is. So at 6th is Boy Jane. This is getting really hard, since like last season, most of these players are pretty poor, so it's splitting hairs to figure out who is less or more poor compared to the other. Boy Jane was in a solid enough position throughout the beginning of the season, as she was in the Bye Bye Bitches and the Professor's alliance, but those alliances never trusted her, which is weird since she's one of the most loyal people in Big Brother history. At the same time, one of the reasons why they didn't trust her is that Boy Jane refused to talk game with people for the first 40 to 50% of the season. That's a huge issue, and it's a huge reason why she ended up on the outs. What I will say about Bowie Jane is that once she realized that her alliance did not care for her at all, she pivoted and moved on to a group of people who would appreciate her. So many Big Brother players find themselves in her position, but refuse to move on or adapt from the alliance that showed them their ass more than once, so it is good that she moved on. The thing with Boy Jane is that she is too loyal, to the point where she only cared about the alliance getting to the end, and she was more than willing to lose the game for her alliance, which happened with Matt and Jeg. She always did what she was told, and there's no individuality in her mind process and thought, and she made many moves that were not in the best interest of her, like letting her allies convince her to boot Cameron, though it wasn't in Boy Jane's best interest. Boy Jane was pretty good at competitions, especially out of the women, though a lot of the men dominated the competitions, hiding her prowess, and she was okay socially. She wasn't particularly hated, but she wasn't particularly liked whatsoever, and she especially was not respected at all. People don't see her as a gamer, and saw that she was playing for someone else instead of herself. I will say that it is very impressive that she was not nominated for the entire season, and she went out of the way to inflict fear in people if she were to be nominated so they could avoid nominating her. Anyways, I don't think Bowie Jane has the ability to really see the flaws in the game, and I don't really see her improving as a player in general, so here she is. So at 5th is America. What's frustrating about America is that she's someone who should have the full package as a player. She did well in the first competition in the season. She's a super fan of the show, even being into the social media element, and generally always knew the strategic move that needed to be made. The issue is, things never really came together for America. She was one of the last people to be added to the ready side of the house, and she was clearly on the bottom. While not having strong relationships with them, though, she never realized that they didn't think they were as close to her as she is to them. She was clearly on the outs of her alliance, and she didn't have any close allies on the other side of the house, with the people on that other side. So she really was not solidified on either side. Corey did help her out, as they got close and he had more connections, but kept her in the loop within the game. People did not target America because she was not seen as threatening by anyone, which is a good thing to state in the house, but she wasn't seen as threatening because she has not she was not respected by people in the house. At the same time, she was also very talkative, to the point where she let out too much information, rubbed people the wrong way, and a lot of people distrusted her. I will say that the Issy flip did start with her, since she realized that Issy had more potential than Felicia as a player, and finally convinced Cameron that he is not in a good position within the house. While the flip was impressive, she had her own ideas about it, and she on her own had no capital whatsoever. So she needed Corey to make further connections and to make the flip happen. Afterwards, she and Corey really took a back seat for the rest of the season. So despite being proponent or heavily influential in the flip that changed the season, they let the game happen around them and they let others form the dynamics that would shape the rest of the season. And America was eventually clipped due to this. The truth is, I don't think America was very liked throughout the season, and while she was not really disliked, people did not have a high opinion on her as a player, and she didn't really do anything to change their perception. She threw the one competition that she was close to winning, which would have caused her to be seen as a player on her own agency, and she couldn't win another competition afterwards. Strategically, she seemed pretty decent and solid, since she knew the moves that needed to be made, but she could not make it happen for the most part, and there's a huge issue with her social game. There isn't much that would indicate her being bad, but there isn't much that would indicate her being good. So she is in this tier. And out of everyone, I think she could be someone who improves on a return. The final person in this tier at 4th is Felicia. I cannot believe Felicia is this high on the list, since I don't think highly of her as a player at all, but it also just shows the low caliber of the Big Brother 25 cast. For an older woman, it was very shocking to see what a good position she was in at the beginning of the season, despite her being nominated in the first week. Felicia was definitely a part of running one side of the house with Izzy and Suri while getting close to some of the others on that side of the house. There was her HOH where she wasted it out on taking out ally Hissam instead of Jag, Matt, or Cameron, where she would later admit was a mistake, but things kind of just continued on, with her aiding Suri and Izzy with targeting people in her alliance and making several alliances that were impossible to keep up with. Felicia ended up being at the bottom of her alliance due to her spilling a lot of information and coming off as a bit competitive, to the point where she was going home for most of the week against Izzy, where she stayed due to nothing of her own doing, and she didn't even know she was the target until afterwards. I will say that her trying to make a final two with Jared backfired, since she did not know that he and Suri are related, and I don't really blame her for that. The same thing would happen a few weeks later regarding her being targeted for most of the week and staying due to reasons that had nothing to do with her, as she actively called out Corey and America, which usually caused people to want to target that person even more, but they decided to take out Mikol instead. Once it was just herself and Sri from their side of the house, Felicia did do moves that would undermine Sri and attempt to put herself in a better position with people like Matt and Jeg so they could take her to the end. This shows self-interest, but most of what she did ultimately didn't matter much and didn't really change anything. Ultimately, Felicia was taken to the end because they had no faith in her winning the competition and she was not a threat, as I don't really think her jury prospects were very high either. Despite not being a good player, I do think that Felicia shocked people with what people did in the game, since many people did not think she would really do anything in the game. She was in a position of power for about half of the season and still lasted much longer than many people did, where she seemed to have more of a concept of the game than what was expected of her, due to the history of many other Big Brother house guests in the past. At the same time, she was in a cast that had a lot more older people on it, where she didn't have to deal with those social hurdles compared to older Big Brother house guests in the past, and I think this season in cast was her best ceiling. While she showed some flexibility and agency, especially a lot more than many older BB house guests, I also think that she would be booted earlier on a lot of other seasons as well. The first person in this tier at 3rd is Corey. It is so sad that 3 people made it above the mediocre tier from this season, and I'm shocked that it's Corey of all people. He did have a disadvantage from being away from the Huskies for the first few hours of the season, while being automatically nominated, but he was able to win over Riley, which caused her to save him for the week. Corey was at the bottom of the alliance with Riley and Jag, though he was making a lot of connections with people like Izzy and Jared, so he had ties to people from both sides of the house. Once it became apparent that the younger side of the house had no foundation, he flipped to the other side, but didn't do it in a tactless way like Cameron did. He still had no target and was playing the middle very well for the next few weeks, and did a good job at stopping some flips, like being the one who prevented Hissam from saying that a man who had something against him from the very beginning, which would have weakened his spot. The issue with Corey is that he got a bit too talkative after the first month or so, and some of his allies started distrusting him. It took him a few more weeks to realize that he was at the bottom of his alliance, and it was America's idea to flip on Izzy. Though things were getting tense with Izzy and endured for a while now, pertaining Corey. But he was the one who put all the pieces together about the fake alliances to everyone in the house, and actually got the votes to make it happen. He was tight with the other side again, and destroyed the prior power structure, but he got passive and complacent once again, to the point where the game was going on without him. He was almost backdoored and got saved due to nothing of his own doing, got in an obsessive feud with Blue, and was booted early jury because of this passivity. I think Corey has the ability to be a top tier player if he were to ever return. He has great social skills for someone his age, and that's usually a hurdle for younger players that he did not have, was decent enough in competitions, and has many good strategic points in the season. Where he ended up faltering is that there are several points throughout the season where he got way too passive and complacent, where he needed to continue the good work he put in previously, and while I do not blame America for this at all, I do think his showmance with her caused him to be very distracted, which I do blame Corey for. Corey also has the tendency to think that he is the smartest person in the room, and would rumble a bunch of details about endgame competitions, which isn't smart. Overall, I do think that he is one of the better players of the season, and has a lot more skills than most people from the cast. And I also think that once he ages up, even a few years, I think he'll be a lot more mature and he'll be able to handle the game in a better manner. So the final person in this tier at second is Matt. There definitely seems to be some sort of revisionist history when it comes to Matt, since he lost the season to Jeg. When it comes to the beginning of the season, he was just as blind as the other members of his alliance, and they were soon targeted. But there was something special about Matt compared to the others, as he started building bonds with people from the other side, especially Suri, and started infiltrating himself to the other side very well with people who are on the Professor's alliance, to the point where he became included in most of those side alliances that Felicia, Suri, and Izzy were making with people in the house, and they trusted him a lot, even more than most of the people in their actual alliance. Matt started ratting out a lot of information to people and information to those people in the Suri, Felicia, Izzy group, and he really moved on from the bad position he was in from the beginning of the season, where all of his allies couldn't do that were on the running side. He didn't need to win a competition, since he was good with pretty much everyone on the season, and they all trusted him, so there wasn't a need for him to target anyone. Of course, there was the flip against Izzy, which he really wasn't involved in much, but he did benefit from the move Corey and America did, since it caused him and Jeg, the person he saved on the latter's eviction week, to be under the radar, and they were able to create their own alliances while being under the radar, where his relationships with Cameron and Bori were the ones that caused them to work with Jeg for the latter part of the season, where the two of them would later dominate. At the same time, it became clear that his lack of understanding pertaining the beta element of Big Brother was catching up to him, since he did not own his game in the goodbye messages. Jag was a bit too much in the forefront, and he really got outplayed in the final five, during his HOH with letting Suri go, where Bori, Jane, and Jag were very aware that it was a bad move for him to do. And watching him explain his game in the jury questioning made it look like his moves were not intentional, and he wasn't very sure of what he did, despite the jurors leaving the house being pro-Matt over at Jag. I think Matt has a lot of the qualities needed to be an upper tier Big Brother player. He is really good socially, knows how to make his target small, can infiltrate in many different groups with other people who are seeking their games, or from people who are seeking their games and to people who are in power, knew when to deflect and play innocent, though I do think his disability might have helped him with that. He is a decent competitor, though I don't think he was a beast like many people in the season claimed. At the same time, I don't know if he has the ability to improve as a player or acknowledge his faults, and a lot of his moves might have been instinctual instead of intentional, while also not understanding some of the beta elements of the game, which is somewhat like Paul in Big Brother 19, and in general, and other people who came into the game not being a fan of it, which we kind of see this repeated pattern of. Despite all of that, I do think Matt does well in pretty much any Big Brother season due to the transferable skills he showed on this season, which is impressive and what's needed for consistency. And I base my rankings on how consistent most people would do on other seasons, based on the skills they showed on their season or seasons. So the only person in this tier and number one for the entire season is Suri. It was clear entering the season that Suri had a lot of advantages compared to everyone else in the cast. One, she has had so many experiences in these competitive social reality shows where, while many of the shows are different, there are different amount of transferable skills from many of these shows, or a decent amount of transferable skills. Another advantage is that she was a known entity, so people would become super fans of her and let it deter their games. And the third one is that she has her son in the game, which is someone she can implicitly trust no matter what. When the season began, she was able to build good relationships with people from both sides of the house, though aligned herself with most of the older people on the season, while her son Jared gave her a lot of information as well. But you did start to see some of her flaws, since she made alliances with everyone in the house, which would be too hard to keep track of, and she was not used to the pacing of Big Brother, which is why I think she turned on allies like Red and Assam way too early, where she did realize that it was a regret. Since Survivor is usually half as long as a Big Brother season, or at least the Survivor season she played. So turning on someone on day 20 or day 25 out of 39 is seen as a big deal, but when you're doing it on day 25 or 29 out of a 100-day season, yeah, that's an issue. She really didn't have much to blame for the Izzy flip, since she was tied to Felicia for 2 days and couldn't stop the chaos happening around her. Suri was at the bottom of the house for the rest of the season, and I do think she played from that position well enough, despite being neutralized. She was able to make up with Matt, which was an important relationship for her, since he would protect her or get other people to protect her. She built a relationship and bond with Blue when they both lost Jared, and the two not really getting along much beforehand, and was able to get into a few alliances, though it was mainly fake. Despite that, it was clear that her lack of competition wins was a huge factor as to why she made it to the end game, as her inability to win one, though she came close during her last few weeks to winning, caused her doom, though Cerise knew the shots that needed to be made during this latter portion of the season. Suri definitely has an impeccable social game, and it was really cool to see it play out live, compared to the 13 40-minute episodes that we saw on Survivor, or the 13 60-minute episodes that we saw on Traders. At the same time, I think it caused people to see her as weaker strategically, as she was very scatterbrained during the beginning of the season, though I do think Izzy was a very large proponent of that, and she turned on her allies too soon, since that's something that is so common in Survivor. Of course, the competitions are her very weak point, but I do think that she showed that she's one of the best in the competitive social reality TV genre with this performance, and she does have a lot of transferable skills. I do worry about her checking out, which she kinda did after Izzy and Jared left midway throughout her experience on the season. But I would have faith in her doing well on many other Big Brother seasons, and I do think she would learn from her mistakes that she made in Big Brother 25, which I can't say for many people on this season, or Big Brother in general. Wow, so not only does this conclude my Big Brother 25 coverage, but this also concludes my coverage of not only just Big Brother USA seasons, but Big Brother North American seasons as well, since I started recapping Big Brother Canada this time last year, and I've been consistent, and I moved right into USA afterwards. And it feels really good to actually complete this and to rewatch the Big Brother franchise with fresh eyes, since sometimes you don't remember all the finer details, especially when you haven't rewatched something in years, or you only last watched it live and it's been many years ago. So what's going to happen next is at some point, I'm going to do a video ranking all the players of the diversity era, so from Big Brother 23 to Big Brother 25. Hopefully, I'll get around that before Big Brother 26 finishes, and then I'm going to rank every single player from Big Brother USA, from Big Brother 2 to Big Brother 25. That video shall also be up before Big Brother 26 concludes. So what's going to happen next, now that it's time for Big Brother Canada, is I'm going to post my list of the Big Brother Canada players. I'm working on that as we speak. And then I'm going to post my video on Big Brother Canada seasons where I rank them. That is a long video that I'm working on now. I don't know if I'm going to combine that with the Big Brother Canada casts, twists, gameplay, drama, all that into one video, or I'm going to post separate videos for all that. So that should be coming out within the next few weeks. And then, of course, I'm making my Big Brother 20 compilation videos, so look out for that. And I might make some other non-Big Brother reality TV related content. So, thank you all for following me on this really great journey. I really do appreciate it. And you can follow me on social media at my Twitter, which is Lala_Annie. And I should be back with some other content soon. I've been meaning to recap the whole drama season, and I am going to get to it, but I'm struggling with finding videos of the first season. Every single time I start rewatching the first season or watching the first season and making my notes, it gets deleted, like the actual video link gets deleted, so I go back to ground zero. So hopefully I find a video link, so I should be able to get out the 2 seasons to you all sooner than later. Alright, take care.